Well, hello, welcome to The Point. Whether you're watching at home in internet land, or whether you're at Hexham Priory School at 9 o'clock or 4 o'clock on a Sunday. My name's David Flavel, and it's great to be able to welcome you to our talk today. We're continuing our series on how Jesus wants to transform us and how Jesus can transform us today. And we're starting by looking at one of the accounts that a friend of Jesus called Mark wrote way back in the New Testament, near the very beginning of the ministry of Jesus. And Mark talks about how Jesus heals a man. Mark 1, 40 to 45. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. That's a very interesting word, isn't it? Jesus was indignant. Jesus was cross that it was being asked whether he was willing or not, because he believed, of course, he was willing, and he wanted to make the man clean. And leprosy was a disease which was a disaster for people in the New Testament times, because not only did it make you ill, but also it made you a leper, somebody who was pushed to the outside of the community, somebody who wasn't allowed to live inside town, somebody to have a bell with them to warn other people, somebody who was a social outcast, so the lowest of the low. And Jesus was indignant when he was asked whether he was willing to make him clean. He reached out his hand and touched the man. Now that in itself is a very big statement, because to touch somebody with leprosy was to have the danger of catching it yourself, because it was contagious and caught by touch. So by reaching out his hand and touching the man, Jesus was touching somebody who was unclean to everybody else. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Notice there the order, the instruction. Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. So the man was healed by Jesus. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." And what you're supposed to do when you had leprosy, if you were cured, then you had to go to the priest, you had to make a sacrifice, and then the priest would say, "Yes, this is you have been cleansed, you are now officially allowed back in the community." So it's almost like, somebody today with a disease where they've got they've been healed from it, they have a certificate to say that they're free to travel now because they haven't got this contagious disease anymore. But why does Jesus tell him to be quiet and not tell anybody, and to go to the priests and show that he's clear of leprosy? Well, the clue's in the chapter number. It's chapter 1 of Mark's Gospel. So it's right at the start of the Gospel and right at the start of the ministry of Jesus. He doesn't want everybody to know who he is yet, because he's got a lot of work to do in teaching his disciples. And in fact, it'll be 3 years before we get to the crucifixion and resurrection. So there's a lot of time in between. He wants to make sure that he can keep teaching his disciples and there won't be thousands of people wanting to know who he is and what he's doing. He doesn't want to raise a fuss, or at least that's his hope. But the man has a different idea. Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So because of this miracle, the news about Jesus had started to spread, and he couldn't even go into a town without being mobbed, and even when he went to the lonely places, people still followed him because they wanted to find out who was this amazing man. This week, Prince Harry walked through a minefield, just as his mother had done before. And there's something in that that's similar to this idea of Jesus touching the leper and Jesus identifying with the leper and being there in the same way that Harry and Diana are doing in our picture. And that brings me to our questions. Number 1, is caring costly? Now you might say Harry and Diana had that path cleared for them in the minefield and they'd sorted it out and made sure it was perfectly safe. But I have to say, if you asked me to walk through a minefield, I wouldn't be that keen on it. And when Jesus touched the leper, of course there was the risk of catching what the leper had, and it was rather a complication, shall we say, for his ministry, in that his ability to be quiet and to be behind the scenes and to do the work he needed to do before he needed to have his public display of going to Jerusalem and death and resurrection, was set completely askew by meeting this man. So is caring costly, number one? And whether you're a Christian or not, you could contemplate that and think, well, is it worthwhile anyway? Or how would you work out the cost benefits of that? Number two, how willing is Jesus to transform the man with leprosy? Now, this is a slightly leading question because you can see from the biblical account what it says, but you could look at why he is willing, or what is it about his willingness that makes him want to change this guy's life. And that leads on a more personal thing to how willing is Jesus to transform you, do you think? Have a think about those questions, and if you're at the point, then sit down at a table and chat with others. If you're at home, then pause the video and then we'll come back together in a minute. So that's all we got time for this week. I'll give you my takeaways and then I'll ask the person in charge to say the final prayer. So what must we do? Well, number one, we should realise that Jesus longs to transform us. He wants to transform us. He wants to change our life. Number two, realise that Jesus longs to transform those around us too. It's not just a personal thing. Jesus wants to transform each one of us. He yearns for that. He has compassion for us, and he's indignant that we might think that he doesn't want to change us. But number three, we need to be bold to do something about it. The advantage that the man with leprosy had that we don't is that he was completely dissatisfied with his life. His life was so awful that he was ready to change, and he wanted to change. And maybe, speaking out of turn here, maybe your life is so awful that you do want to change, and maybe you do need to change it. In that case, be bold like he was. He crossed all sorts of barriers by reaching out to Jesus. He should have kept away and should have kept quiet, but he was having none of it. He was determined that Jesus was going to transform his life. If you want it, he's ready to do it.